Glad you are back and getting ready to finish up the course for AP Government. We are at the end of the course, so this is the last week that we have information coming out for you. This week we're going to be talking about the media and the role that the media started out in, talking about press, and then getting into how has it evolved, what is the job of the media, and what can you do in order to be involved with getting your information from the media to then be an informed voter, informed citizen. So let's get into things for today. Looking back in history, many times we think like, oh, the only real conversations about media was coming from our First Amendment, which was freedom of the press. Now, as we know in our First Amendment, we have freedom of religion, assembly, speech, petition, press. Okay, so we've got a lot of those rights. Freedom of the press, the intention was that people could openly say or critique the government that was in operation at the time. So that was the intentions behind it, a way to connect the people to the government and not have any misinformation going out. Obviously we know back when America was the colonies, King George had a lot of censorship, didn't allow people to speak out against him. So that was a really big deal, is allowing a government to be critiqued and allowing conversations to grow if there needed to be changes made or some kind of form of evolution happening over time as our society ends up changing. So we know that there was freedom of the press. There wasn't quite a lot happening at this time. You needed to have a printing press in order to send out news and information like that, so there wasn't a lot of sharing of information. So many times our information, our news, our media, it was very local. Okay, local to a city, local to a town. There was nothing national about it at first. We really see the use of the printing press coming in hand back when we think about our Federalist and anti-Federalist conversations. Now we're thinking back to Unit 1 here. Federalists were in favor of passing and ratifying the Constitution. Our anti-Federalists were afraid of government overreach and wanted to have different protections put in place, did not like the Constitution in its final form, wanted more adaptations. So a way for them to share their ideas was through the printing press. So they would write essays, write up these different news stories in order to share their ideas, share the ideologies about the Constitution. So the major newspapers that came out of this time period was the Gazette of the United States and the National Gazette. Okay, one of my favorite stories of our founding fathers using the press would go back to the election of 1800. Now, if you've never heard of this story, hold on to your seats. It's pretty funny. Okay, so Jefferson and Adams, who are our two people up here in the right-hand picture, they were both running for president at the same time for that election of 1800. So Adams really started this fight where he was making public statements that Thomas Jefferson, if you end up electing him as president, he is going to bring over new women from England and our wives are going to cheat on us. And like there were just these wild rumors going back and forth between these men through the newspaper to the point where they were like calling each other out for like what genitals they had, and even to the point where it was like, he's dead, so why vote for him? And these were things that were posted in newspapers and then shared out. So it actually ended up ruining one of their election campaigns, obviously because some of the country thought the other was dead. So the newspaper had a huge influence in politics, even way back in the 1800s. But again, it was that local piece to it. One of the very first major, more nationwide, but still kind of local to the eastern coast, was called the New York Sun. They were really known for sharing the reader interest stories, so more about like humans, sharing recipes, what are the big business moguls up to these days? And yeah, more of those like small-time stories. The government was not a part of the paper. It really wasn't until the start of the Associated Press, or also AP, that got started in 1848. It wasn't until the Associated Press came around that we started to have politics really in the newspapers again. What allowed this to happen was the use of the telegraph. With the invention of the telegraph, communications could spread across the country, and then those communications could be shared out in newspapers across the country. So these major news companies would get together and share that information with each other. So a story from New York could be shared to Michigan, a story from New York could go all the way down to Florida, and so on and so on. And so they would collaborate together in order to have national news headlines. Now, they came together with the goal of having unbiased news all across the country, and it was the first time that the government was going to start having commentary by citizens. So you have the average citizen now at this point, throughout the 1800s, as they really get their start, average citizens are getting into talking about politics and having that information shared with them. So no longer is it just the elites having those conversations or the people that are living close to DC having those conversations about politics. Now it's the average citizen because these newspapers came together to share information through the telegraph, hopefully in an unbiased way, in order to, again, get that information out there. So that's kind of a little bit of the track record of how we get up to having these national newspapers sharing information. Now, media has definitely changed since obviously the 1800s. Most of you are not waiting for your local print newspaper to come out and pay your penny in order to read it. Okay, so how has the media changed over time? Okay, so we start out as newspapers on the streets. Typically, you're hiring maybe children during the Industrial Revolution to spread newspapers, get payments. They'll bring those payments back to the company. Well, around the Industrial Revolution, we start to have investigations, really the muckrakers. If you can remember back to United States history, our muckrakers are these journalists and reporters who are going around getting the scoop. They're finding out how a company maybe is misusing funds or they are not following regulations. One of the most renowned muckrakers is Upton Sinclair. He wrote The Jungle, which talks about how a meat packing company was basically grinding up trash, and I say trash as in like mice, rats, potentially a finger that got caught into the grinders. It was dirty work conditions. The workers weren't paid well. So it was all about exposing the bad parts of society. And so these muckrakers would then sell their stories to newspapers, which then were read by the general public. And it was a way to keep a check on the businesses around you and start the conversations of like, we need to fix this. This also involved having fireside chats. As we know, FDR was primarily the one hosting these, of again having political commentary as a nation, where you are hearing the voice of your leaders having conversations about what's happening in the world, what's happening nationally, things like that. Obviously, we have election coverage. Now, this is going to be much more popular, especially once TV comes along. Having a presidential debate on a TV where viewers can see what their leaders look like, how they talk, what they sound like, and see them under pressure. That completely changed how election campaigns were going to happen and how people prepped for debates. Whereas before, you could kind of think about your answers, you could send it out in the media, you talked on the streets one-on-one with someone, but you weren't facing off in this debate style on the national news for everyone to see. As we continue on into the 60s, 70s, 80s, we really get into what's called investigative journalism. Now, one of the most renowned reporters was Walter Cronkite. He was the host for CBS News, and he was known as the most trusted man in America. He got his start, he graduated with a degree in political science and then started reporting on World War II. He was hired by CBS to go around and gather stories about the Western Front, what did it look like, and then report back on this back home. Well, he was picked up as a news anchor to share the nightly news. It started out, it used to be a 15-minute segment, but because people were so interested in what Walter Cronkite had to say, they expanded it to a 30-minute news segment, the first in the nation to ever have a 30-minute news segment. And he was known for not involving any of his politics, his personal opinions, any bias. He just reported, that was it. And so a lot of people turned to Walter Cronkite in order to get their information because they knew that it was succinct, it was unbiased, and you could trust what was coming from him. Even to the point where presidents have been known to say, like, if I'm not going to be favored by Walter Cronkite anymore, then I've lost the American people. Like, that's how influential his reporting was for citizens and even on politics. Now, in the 1990s, we see a major change come about for news media. We start having cable news networks such as Fox and CNN. And it changed the style of the way that we were consuming news and consuming media. It went from reporting of this has happened, this is it, to commentary, to starting to insert opinions and starting to insert predictions, commentary, conversations. And so that's really where we see 1990s, 1996, really, that major change from just like, here's the news versus, hey, let's talk about the news. And today we have a lot of our news consumption through social media. Think about Twitter, thinking about Snapchat maybe, even TikTok. Are you possibly getting some like quick glimpses of what's happening in the news from these social media sites? So this could be where you're getting, when you're looking at this, you're thinking of like your sources, where is the site coming from, which friends are sharing this kind of information, and the different advertisements. Is it an advertisement or is it something that's been shared? So there's a lot more consumption happening and a lot more critical thinking skills that are taking place as we are changing how we are getting our news, how we're getting the reporting of local and national politics, or just general world happenings out there. So what's the purpose of having news? What's the purpose of having press? Well, originally, and now really, we really want the news to be a check on the government by its citizens. So exposing things if there's corruption, or keeping the media and the public connected in some way, keeping politics and the citizens connected. Okay, so the press is sharing that information. They're going to be reporting. What is our government doing? How are they spending money? What are, those big government decisions? They are connecting citizens with those decision-making conversations that are happening. It is a linkage between the government and the people. Okay, that's why they call possibly the press the watchdog. They are not loyal to citizens. They are not loyal to the government. Okay, they are that linkage where they're going to make sure truth is getting exposed in some way or another. Now, like I said previously, we're starting to see a change in how we are consuming our news. Is it reporting or is it commentary? And it's important to think about, how do I tell the difference? Well, you can think of it in terms of like horse race news. And the way that our media sites more recently are working is I'm going to get more money if more people want to advertise in the commercial time slots or as side spots on my website. So who's getting the most views? Who's the most popular? That's going to lead back to how are you framing your information? I remember a story talking to a previous worker of the Battle Creek Enquirer, and they were a writer. So how it would work is these reporters would write up a story and have a basic headline, say 16-year-old arrested in Marshall. Okay, automatically you're going to get a certain group of people that are focusing, 16-year-old, I wonder if I know that 16-year-old. They're going to click on it. Oh, they're from Marshall, I wonder if I know them. Or it's in the local area. Most likely Marshall people are going to click on that link. And the more clicks you get, the more advertising you're going to get. Now, the person that I spoke to about this said, media sites are going to change headlines if they're not getting enough traction on a report. So all of a sudden, let's look at MHS, 16-year-old, arrested in Marshall for breaking into OBX, or, some local business. Oh, wow, now it's, it could be a classmate of mine. Is it a teacher that's involved? Parents, it's sucking in a specific group of people, so that way they are going to get more clicks. Okay, so that's what that horse race news is. Who can be the most popular? Who can get the news out the quickest? So we need to keep that in mind as we're looking at the purpose of the press and what they're doing for us. A lot of times, in order to gain popularity or gain the first click, they're going to use polling in order to talk about the issues too. So keep in mind, how are they using polls? What information are they getting? Who are they talking to? We've talked about polling already in this class, so just keep that in mind as you are looking at reporting versus that commentary. Now, as we have more media consumption, especially because everyone has the internet in their pockets these days, let's consider, does more news result in more political engagement? Right? So if you have more people understanding or hearing about what's happening in politics, are we going to have more people engaged, more people voting, more people having a voice in what their political opinions are? And so that goes back to, are we a democracy? Are we allowing every single citizen a voice on these issues? Well, with media and with newspapers, press, we are hopefully educating our citizens so that way they are having a better chance at having that voice. And they're using that opportunity to be involved with the democracy that our founding fathers set up. And again, maybe are we getting more informed? You think back to the 1800s where maybe not everyone had access to a newspaper. Well, now we all have access. We all have the opportunity to go out and seek new information, seek these sources. As soon as you think of a question, you can go look it up. You don't have to go out of your way to research. So are our citizens in the United States hopefully more informed? I don't know. I'll let you kind of be the determining factor on that one. Now, it is important to note that because we have more news, we also have a divide in ideologies. We obviously have different ideological news reporting media, but that's also resulting in a divide of ideologies of citizens. You know just as much as I do that citizens these days are more divided on politics than ever before. Everyone has a solid stance, yes or no. And so you have to think, are we thinking that way because we're becoming more informed? Are we thinking that way because of the media sites that we're getting our information from? Or is this just the cycle of a democratic constitution? Okay. So this is kind of down the track of getting into media bias. And this is what I really want you guys to take away from this week is, how do I consume media appropriately? And what do I need to do? What do I need to be aware of? Well, as this reporting evolved into commentary, more bias and ideology really started to shift. As people are commentating, predicting, really breaking down and analyzing, that's going to relate more to personal opinions. It's not necessarily like what is happening, it's just analyzing, it's talking over in a continuous cycle of the same information. And that's going to start showing bias and start to show a shift in, what side of the aisle does a newspaper or a news media outlet really start to favor. Okay, so again, we need to think back to the 1990s and then really into the 2000s, the divide between Fox News and CNN News. Fox News typically aligns on the right, and CNN typically is going to align on the left. And they're doing that for a reason. Fox News came out in the 2000s and said, we're the ones that are going to be reporting. We're the ones that aren't going to be adding in any kind of liberal bias into our news media. And people liked that, especially after 9/11 when it was very patriotic, pro-American, in favor of a lot of those more Republican views, especially with Bush as our president at the time. And no one else had come out and said, like, hey, those guys are biased. It was an evolving world. And so because Fox News came out and said everyone else is reporting biasly and we are not, it automatically created an us versus them type of media consumption, to the point that we still see this today, where Fox and CNN are kind of against each other, and even listeners or watchers of Fox versus CNN see it in terms of a us versus a them. Now, media has transitioned to be a more profit and for the ratings driven style, where you need to be in, keep in mind, how are they presenting me information? Am I getting sucked in because of a headline, and that's going to get them more clicks? Okay, so the breaking news, right? That's going to change. Oh, I gotta know. It's something big, it's all in caps, it's in big red words. Okay, they're getting you on that clickbait kind of information. Media will also use sad stories in order to get you to click on their websites a little bit more. Okay, so the saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Okay, so that's why we hear a lot more about murders or weapons and gun violence. Things like that are going to be top headlines on media because it's going to gather more clicks on the site. Okay, so if you were to look up the data of how many shootings were happening versus how many shootings are being reported, it's pretty weird to see. So, keep in mind, is there really a lot of this happening right now, or is the news really hyper focusing on an issue because they're getting more clicks? It's really easy for our media news companies to also focus on the easy, low hanging fruit, which is celebrity gossip. Okay, so are you interested in a certain celebrity? Was a certain celebrity arrested? They're going to use that information again to get more traffic on their website. So be conscious, enjoy your tabloids, enjoy the breaking news, but keep in mind, is there potentially bias behind it? Am I getting sucked into a story that maybe isn't completely true, or they don't have all the information yet, but they're trying to be the first ones out there? So, as we get into media bias, we've created something also called a faux debate. Okay, so these two media companies have created an us versus a them. Well, now what? What kind of tactics are they using? They're going to focus on talking points. If there is a talking point that really gets people riled up, or people are going to start watching their information more, of course they're going to focus on sticking with those talking points. More recently, it's going to be those talking points of our presidents. Okay, so President Biden, former President Trump, the ideological differences, what are they doing in their off times? Those are huge talking points. And election interference, and maybe more about like police and violence and things like that. Those are all huge talking points because there's a lot of traction behind it for citizens. Many times, our media companies will only provide two sides to an argument. So as a consumer, it makes you feel like there's a right or a wrong. It's a this or a that. When in reality, there can be many different sides, many different opinions to a political issue or a societal issue. So as you guys are watching news media, as you're reading a story, consider, are they only showing me one side? Are they showing me this side, but then only giving me the really bad facts of the other side? There doesn't just have to be black or white. It doesn't just like this answer or this answer. There can be many different shades to a conversation. Many times, media news outlets will use a revolving door of pundits or political experts. So they will come in and say, we've got expert, we've got professor from Harvard, all these different things. And so it makes you feel like, well, they're the expert. They know the right answer. There's a lot of different experts out there, guys. Okay, and they are all experts in their own different way, and they all have their own bias, their own different understandings of a topic. Okay, so don't just take the word expert or professional or doctor as the end of your research, end of your gathering of information. It is just one of many. As we know more recently, another big keyword right now is fake news. Okay, so fake news is maybe false or misleading information that ends up being presented as news. Typically, your fake news is going to be damaging the reputation of a person or an entity, and hopefully you're going to be making money off of that advertising. So it's sharing information before you have all the information. Potentially it's wrong. Again, because you didn't wait to get all the information, or you're listening to gossip, things like that. So you always want to make sure that you're doing that extra research, finding out what is the truth behind the information I'm being told. Many news companies now are providing less and less context between situations. For example, thinking back to our freedom of speech, freedom of the press, think about the group of boys who were seen pictured next to a Native American gentleman who had a drum. Okay, so a lot of news outlets took an image of what looked like a standoff between these young white boys from a Catholic school harassing or something like that to this older gentleman. And so these media news companies took this story, ran with it. This boy got harassed by people all over the country. His school was getting calls for them to be expelled, things like that. And in reality, it didn't have any context behind it. The older gentleman in the picture came out and said, like, this isn't what happened at all. The boy ended up being able to sue a lot of these major news companies and winning because they provided a story, filled in the gaps, and they didn't provide context to the situation. That's absolutely happening in media companies. Okay, so make sure, for a situation like that, consider, is there more to the story than what I'm being told? Am I only being told one side of the story? Are there many other situations or many other sides to whatever I'm consuming at this point in time? So as we look at media, we have to consider who's in control of our media consumption too. You have little local news networks like WWNT, Fox 17, things like that, but then who's controlling those companies? And it's interesting to see that really a lot of our media is actually coming from like 5 major companies. Disney, Time Warner, CBS, NBC News, they're all kind of lumped together and owned by, really, AT&T is owning a lot of these different companies. So while Comedy Central is airing a broadcast about PACs and how you can start a PAC or end a PAC, that's all the way up to Viacom. Viacom is owned by CBS News. Okay, so then does CBS News have any bias? And is that bias maybe trickling down? Do they have certain policies that these maybe little news networks have to follow? Things like that. So keep all of this information in mind, that today most news is coming from 5 major companies. So when we're looking for bias, what do we want to keep in mind? Well, are they choosing to select only a selection of data? Are they choosing to keep information out of the story because it's going to ruin the film or the vision that they have on this news story? Are they placing a headline somewhere or having the wording of a headline look a certain way? So maybe you go to Fox and a conversation about bombings in Syria, that is like the head newsline, big, bold, that that's a big story. But when you go to CNN, the bombings of Syria are like 3 or 4 stories down, small text, a little bit harder to find. Okay, so that placement for media, that can change a lot of how many clicks something is getting and how informed those viewers are going to be on a subject. Who are their sources? You always want to consider, who are the sources? What kind of experts? What is the background of those experts? Are they well regarded in their own community, or are they a little bit out there? Have they been known to lie in the past? We want to know, who are our sources? Is it random Joe off the street just making an opinion statement? Or is it a top Harvard scientist who has 30 years in the business, kind of a thing? And then always keep in mind, these companies can manipulate the statistics. Take a look at figure E here down in the picture, where we're looking at, it's literally the same information. Okay, so we're looking at the number of students and the difference between 3 different schools. If you were showing the figure on the left, okay, not too bad, right? They're all pretty similar next to each other. Yeah, it's obvious that there's a difference, but it's not too bad. However, if you change the y-axis a little bit, all of a sudden our data looks really skewed. It looks a lot different, and we start to see, oh, okay, school 3 is getting a lot more than the other two. Changing the manipulation behind the statistics can definitely change how you're forming your opinions. So again, pay close attention to the data and statistics. Charts are not the end, and they aren't always reliable. So, what can you do? As you are moving forward as citizens, you are becoming politically involved. What do you need to keep in mind as you go out and you're starting to consume political information from different media sites? Well, you want to know, when was the source published? Was this published back in 2010 or was it 2021? More information has probably come out since 2010. Or maybe the perspectives, okay? So we want to know, when was this information published? Who is writing or talking about the information? Are they known to be biased? Who do they work for? What is their background? What are their credentials? Is the publisher connected to any maybe specific interest groups? Do they have a PAC? As we know from information last week, you can still be a reporter and have your own PAC. As long as you're not talking about the PAC, as long as you're reporting on the PAC and not having your own personal commentary, completely legal. Okay, so we want to know that information. Is there potentially some misleading bias behind their news reporting? If you're getting stuff sent to you on social media, who is sending you this link? Is it your great Aunt Sally who doesn't have a great background in political science? Or is it something that is from someone that is well respected and you trust their judgment? You know that they're going to do their research before they just share something out. What's the domain of the website or the link that you're sharing? Is it .edu, .com, .org? Okay, .coms, not super reliable. .orgs, still not super reliable. Your .edus are most likely going to be the best kind of data that you can gather. And while we're on the topic of data, what data is the author using in order to back up their statements? Are they just making these wild opinions with having no information to back it up? How is their data being collected? Hey, how was polling done? Who did they poll? When did they do the polling? What kind of questions were they asking? It's hard work being educated, but it's really important. Okay, what kind of language are they using? And are you able to collaborate this source with other information? Can you corroborate what is being said? If you have this wild news headline, you're like, this seems crazy, I can't believe this person would say it, go double check real quick, okay? Even if it comes out true, awesome, you double checked yourself. But it may be, again, going back to like fake news, fake links going to these weird off websites. You never know. You want to make sure that people are going to trust what you have to say, especially because you guys are taking AP Government. Students and your friends are going to trust the information that you have to say more because most likely you're probably going to be more politically engaged going on from here. All right, guys, that's it. That is the end of this course, end of the information. If you have any questions, please reach out. Please let me know. I am happy to talk.